All right, let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, welcome to the webinar. This is the second series for our vendor series with Denodo. So today we have our presenter, Anessa, who is going to be talking about Denodo a little bit more from a deeper architectural level. So we had a meeting on Tuesday as well to go over some use cases with Nationwide Insurance. And so we're going to be digging into the technical deep dive today for data virtualization. So just real quick on the agenda, the first 5 minutes we're going to spend on an intro of WiA and Denodo, and then we will jump right into the discussion and leave some time at the end for Q&A. So as you start thinking of questions, feel free to just post them into the Q&A section, and we'll get to those at the end. And then finally, we're going to spend a couple of minutes closing this out, showing you how to get to the recording and what other events we have coming up. So just a quick overview of the vendor series. The WiA vendor series is a free virtual series that features leading analytics products and solutions. This series is delivered in 2 parts. So we cover use cases in the first part, and then we do a technical deep dive on the technology or the solution in the second part. And we do these once a month. So, feel free to join us every time we go through some of these new capabilities in the analytics industry. A little bit about WiA. We're an organization to increase the visibility of women making an impact in the analytics space. We have a lot of ways that you can engage with us. We have these webinars that we host quite a bit every month. We also have other virtual series that you can join. In addition to that, we have a membership platform that you can also join and stay involved with us. We do a lot of work around providing, available jobs in the analytics field, in addition to talking about a lot of different technical topics in analytics. A little bit about Denodo. So they are the leader in the data virtualization space. They have over 900 customers. They were recently actually just named a leader by Gartner for data management solutions. So very, very exciting, and congrats to that company and the whole team. And I'm particularly excited about this topic because this is just so timely when you're talking about data management and context and being able to easily find and get data from disparate data sources. So I'm super excited to be doing this virtual series with Denodo. A couple of things just to note, so some administrative items. If you are having any issues, please use the chat or our email and we will answer those questions for you, help you get it figured out. If you do have a question, like I said, please throw it in the Q&A. And if you are ready to participate, we do have a poll that we're going to launch in the beginning. So keep your eye out on your screen for that. And finally, let's introduce our speaker today. So we have Anessa Garber with us. She is a part of Denodo's product management team and works closely with customers and prospects to understand their projects and requirements. With over 18 years of experience in data integration, data quality, and master data management space, she's able to visualize an enterprise level solution spanning different projects and often different products. During her career, she was also a solutions architect and project manager, which enables her to understand different layers of the project requirements and organizational structure. Originally from Russia, she has a great passion for mathematics and physics, as well as traveling the world and unique experiences. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really, really excited about this session.
Thank you.
So real quick, before we get started, like I said, we have a poll for you. So if you're just now joining us, we're going to launch this poll and give you just a little bit to fill this out. So the poll is, do you trust your data? This is like a pretty meta question to ask people, right? First answer would be no, the data can be inconsistent, spread out, hard to find. The second answer is yes, our data is curated and trusted, at least we think so. So I'll give you all just a few seconds to fill this out. All right, almost everyone. Awesome. All right, end poll. So actually not surprising, 100% of the participants said no. So yeah, not shocked by that at all. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Anessa, and you can share your screen and get started. Like I said, please throw your Q&A questions and we'll get to those towards the end.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me start sharing. All right, so thank you everyone for joining. And today I would like to go and talk about data virtualization, both conceptually and feature-wise. This is a deep dive into the product, so let's take a look at our agenda. Before we start talking about the product details, it's critical to understand why we're doing what we're doing. What is the goal? What are the objectives in data management? Then we will discover what data virtualization is. What are the key features and functions of data virtualization and how Denodo plays a role? And then we're going to do a deep dive into the product itself. I'll take you through the life cycle of the deployment, how you go from connecting the data all the way to the consumption of the data. So first, let's start with our business objectives. And if you attended the webinar from Nationwide on Tuesday, it was made clear that what our clients are looking for is that single entry point to get access to all of your data. You don't want to go shopping around for different items in different stores. You don't want to spend hours upon hours, weeks upon weeks to actually looking for the data. You want to be able to go to a single place and find all the information you're looking for. You want to have that single cart for all of the data. Also, you want to make sure that your users are self-enabled. You want to ensure that every single time they need some additional information, they're not having to call you. They don't have to go to IT. They don't need to call their friends. They don't need to go to and search multiple places. They want to enable self-service. If I'm looking for something, and a Nationwide's presentation, it was looking for some commodity in a store, in my aspect, that would be looking for a specific piece of information for my customer details. I want to be able to find it quickly without the need to go to the IT department. And security and governance is critical. If I'm looking for something, I want to see results applicable to me, results that I'm allowed to see. But if someone else is looking for the same information, you might need to hide certain aspects of the data. So to have that single point of entry, enabling self-service culture, and enabling that centralized security model with full data lineage, data maskings, all of the artifacts around the governance of the data is critical for agile data management. So we know what we're looking for, but what do we actually have? And this is a very generic picture, which takes us about 40 years about the data history. Obviously, there is more data that was coming before 1980s, but this is the recent data story. Companies have so much data collected in different aspects, in different formats, that it becomes scary. So initially, we started with data age. We moved into the data warehouses. We started moving all the data and consolidating it into those big data warehouses, structured data, easy to find if you know what you're looking for. But then the social data came into place. And you can't just take the social data and put it into data warehouse. It's unstructured. It has different formats. It's hard to stage. So we started looking into the big data world. After all, the storage is pretty inexpensive, so we can collect all the data we want, we can put it in the data lakes, and essentially what we end up creating is a data swamp. But we still have all that information. So when we're trying to visualize, when we're trying to access that data, we have to figure out how to find that information. But we still continue to collect all the data. After all, data is gold, data is value. And then in the modern data age, we get all the IoT devices. I have internet connection in my car. I have an application connection to my car. The manufacturer knows my driving habits. They know my history. They know my financial situation. They can create insight And they can use that insight about me as the driver. The interesting part here is what's going to happen next. And an interesting story happened about a year ago. I took my 8-year-old daughter into a big room, a very cold room. Actually, it was a whole floor filled with servers, filled with computers, filled with mainframe systems. And I was trying to explain to her that all of those servers are computers and blah, 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 the usual story. And she's looking at me like, no, those are not computers. And I was shocked. I was like, no, they are. And actually, I was working with a very nice ops guy, and he was trying to pull out wires, and he was trying to show her that, yes, those are servers, they're connected. Those are the actual computers. And she looked at me, no, my laptop is the computer, the tablet. And I realized that she's the consumer. She doesn't care where the data is coming from. She doesn't need to know. And when she goes to college, most likely, they're not going to be teaching about mainframes. They're not going to be teaching about data warehouses even. They're going to be teaching something new. The way technology is changing is so rapid that the companies need to pick and choose a very agile approach to data integration. It's not about just ESBs for transactional systems. It's not about ETLs trying to move the data around and constantly creating the centralized data store. It's about agile approach. It's about stop collecting the data and start connecting all the data that you have. Don't move the data. Leave the data where it is. About 2 years ago, Gartner released this quote saying that by 2022, about 60% of organizations are going to implement data virtualization as their integration style. Is it true? If we take to the current situation, just in 2 years, Denodo, who is a pure data virtualization player, has been named a leader in data integration Magic Quadrant. This shows you that Gartner was right. Data virtualization is going to play a critical role in the data integration into the data fabric itself by creating a logical data fabric. And this is what we'll be talking about next. So what is data virtualization? As you saw in the introduction slide, data virtualization is the key attribute of the Denodo. Denodo is the longest continuing focus on data virtualization. We are a leader in Gartner and the Forrester waves. We have offices all over the place, many success stories from our customers, and all of those aspects around data virtualization by creating a logical data fabric. But now let's actually look into the middle of the product. What is data virtualization itself? Data virtualization is that middle layer which provides an abstraction between your data assets, between your data stores, and consuming applications. The middle layer consists of multiple aspects. First, we gotta talk about the development. We have to put on our developer hat and see how does this architecture change the developer's life. The developers, they would create connections to different data marts, different data sources. They need to establish that connection to the data itself. Keep in mind, we're not moving the data around, we're connecting to the data. And then they would start modeling the data. They would apply the business logic, the semantics layer, into the actual data itself, working with the metadata. And then there are multiple ways the data can be delivered to the consumers. But how do you actually deploy the solution? And their deployment models is very flexible. You gotta keep in mind, we have to be agile. You gotta think ahead about 10 years from now. What is the data is going to look like? What is the deployment going to look like? We've been moving from on-prem into the cloud. What's next? So Denodo, as the data virtualization platform is very flexible. It can be deployed on-prem, it can be deployed in the cloud environments. It has a full array of monitoring, version control tools. It's a full package solution for your DevOps, regardless of your deployment model. But we've been talking about data being in place. We're not moving the data. And we are talking about millions upon millions and billions of records spread across your enterprise. How do we actually get all the data? We created the model, we have the semantics layer, but how do we actually get the data? We get the data in real time, upon demand. When our consumer is accessing the data query is being pushed down to the data sources. Denodo facilitates multiple accelerations to accelerate the query, to optimize the query. Some of them would be caching MPP, and I'm going to go into more details. But the data is returned at real time to the consumer, matching the semantics layer. Data access is fully governed. You have that centralized layer of the security defining who can access what data. If there's any data masking rules which need to be applied, you have the data lineage, you have the full governance layer centralized. So you don't need to define it multiple times, depending on the consumer connecting to a data source. Your consumers are connecting to Denodo. Denodo is connecting to the data. So if tomorrow you need to move data from your traditional data store into the cloud environment, nothing is changing for the consumer. Consumer is talking to that abstraction layer. But how is the consumer communicating? Depending on the consumer. If you talk about analytical tools, they have a simple JDBC-based interface via SQL. They would connect to the Denodo and get all the information. For microservices and application-to-application connectivity, we provide APIs. And we also have our own data catalog for the data discovery and exploration. So going back to the Gartner, when they said that 60% of organizations are going to go with the data virtualization by 2022, this is the Gartner representation of the logical architecture. So when we look at this picture, we see data warehouses, we see data lakes, multiple data sources, and multiple consumers. So this is where Denodo fits. Again, it's an abstraction layer between your consumers and your data stores. With the data stores themselves, direct connection, with the data warehouses, with the data lakes. So now let's continue to drill deeper into the product itself and talk about essential capabilities of data virtualization. So when we talk about data virtualization, there are 6 key features which are critical to be successful. A, data has to be completely abstracted from the consumer. Consumers are not connecting to the data, consumers are connecting to the virtual layer. Virtual layer connects to the data itself. Data is not copied. Data stays in place, 0 replication. And this is the biggest difference when we talk about different integration lifestyles. When you talk about ETL, it's all about data movement. When you talk about ESB, it's transactional data. With data virtualization, we're talking about 0 data replication, data stays in place, and we're simply connecting and combining the data for the consumption. So you're getting real-time information. No stale data, you get that single version of truth. There is no data replication. You don't have multiple data copies. Self-service. You need to ensure that your consumers are not only BI applications, but the consumers are actual business users who can do data discovery, and they have tools to do data discovery, such as Denodo Data Catalog. Centralized metadata and security management. When you onboard a new system, or when you have the migration project across multiple data stores, for instance, you're moving into the cloud environment, you're moving into the Snowflake. If you have the data virtualization layer, you don't have to go and change all of your consumers to connect to now new data source, and recreate the security model. Security model is centralized. Also, you need to make sure that the data virtualization platform can be deployed anywhere. Again, 10 years from now, when our kids are going to be in college, you don't know what's going to be the new deployment model. Currently, it's all about clouds, it's all about containers. It might be some different hybrid architecture. So you need a platform which is flexible, adjustable, and not that monolithic big product, which is hard to move. With Denodo, you can easily move it from on-prem to the cloud, back on-prem. You can have hybrid, which we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. So it's all about agile, it's all about flexibility, it's all about being leader in the data virtualization. Now let's look at some of the critical features, and this is where we're going to do a deep product dive. First, we are talking about connecting data and combining data into the semantics layer. We are a developer, but the requirements for the data are driven by the business user. The business user wants to get access to the customer information. They want to see the campaign information. They want to see the financial information in the department. So all they care about is that semantics layer and that single version of truth. They want to be sure that if I'm asking for a lead in the campaign, and if someone else is asking for a lead in the campaign, that lead has the same definition. Without a single version of truth in data virtualization, the way you define that business entity might be different. Is the lead just someone I just contacted and had a 2-minute conversation with? Or is the lead something that was qualified? When we talk about education, what does it mean to have a registered student? Is someone registered if they just submitted an application? Or is someone registered because they left a deposit? Or is it someone registered who is starting the course? Depending on the user, the definition might be different, so the response they get might be different. When you have the unified semantics layer with the centralized definition of what it means to be a business entity, that guesswork is eliminated. You get that single version of truth. So again, going back to the developer, as the developer, I can create connections to multiple data sources in any format using a web design studio. As you can see on the screenshot here, I can create relationships between different entities, and I can start building up a very complex semantics layer, creating multi-level semantics layer. I can take a bottom-up approach where I define the data locations, and I can start building, creating the semantics layer from bottom up. I can also take a top-down approach. I can actually import pre-existing data models and start creating the interface views. And then I can tell my developer, saying, you know what? This is my interface view. This is my semantics layer. Now, you are the data owner. Go map your data assets into the semantics layer. So you have the flexibility, bottom up or top down. The data access is on demand. So we're not replicating data. And this is where the critical aspect comes in, performance. If you're not moving the data around, data is in its original data formats across multiple locations. How are we accessing the data? How are we going to ensure that the consumer is not spending 5 minutes waiting for the response? What about 30 seconds? What about a minute? What is the acceptable response time? Well, it would really depend on the consumer, but normally I have not met a business application developer and analytics user who would spend more than couple of seconds, maybe 5 seconds, staring on the blank screen looking for the results. It's wasting their time. So Denodo utilizes multiple optimization mechanisms to ensure that we can deliver data at real time, quickly to the consumer. Some of the key capabilities in optimization is caching. We can actually cache some of the information, especially when we talk about data sources such as web services or APIs, which have long latency over the network. We can cache some information. We have incremental cache, full cache, and we can utilize this when rendering the queries. Message parallel processing can be also utilized, so we can actually process data in parallel. We have data movement. If we have multiple data sources, one data source has millions upon millions of records, and another one is a small data source which has a couple of hundred of customer records, we can actually take that little data source, that small table, move it into the location of a large data set, do query optimization and query pushdown, do all of the calculations in that data source, and just propagate relevant results back to the consumer. So we have capability of data movement. We also analyze the queries. We do query rewrite. So when you have complicated joins and unions, we actually analyze and we see the cost of the query, and we can do query rewrite to optimize it based on your data store. We are talking about analytics here. So smart query acceleration is a critical option in the Denodo platform. It enables the client to have a summary of pre-aggregated information which can be used to facilitate the query execution. And there is much, much more on the performance. But the key here is that the performance and all of the fine-tuning, all of those little details are hidden from the user. They're done under the covers by Denodo Query Optimizer. The user is oblivious to the fact that they're happening. They can see that they're happening if they look at the trace, but they don't have to care. And this is again about my daughter looking at all of those servers, and she didn't care where the data is coming from. She just wants the data. This is about the consumption. This is even about the developers. They just want to create and connect and combine. So now you have that agile solution which has all of your semantics layer defined. You can query all of your data sources regarding of the format, regarding of the location. But how can you deploy it? With the Denodo, you have flexibility to deploy it on-prem or in the cloud or in hybrid environments or in containers using Kubernetes, whatever is your liking. It comes with automatic deployment. It comes with the solutions manager, which enables you to have a full deployment lifecycle. It enables you to manage multiple environments within the same single interface. It enables you to have diagnostics. You can monitor. You can isolate bottlenecks. You can see the query executions. You can see how often certain things are being executed. You can see resource utilization. When you're managing multiple environments, you can do propagation across multiple environments, again, from a single interface. And the key here is that that single interface, that single pane of glass of the solution manager can manage multiple environments. So why is it critical? If you recall, I mentioned that as we move across the data story, more and more companies are faced with the migration projects. They're moving data into the cloud environments. They're moving data into different data stores. They're moving their solution into the cloud itself. And this is where Denodo and data virtualization can be a game changer. During that migration process, Denodo can provide that abstraction layer between your consumers and the data. So as you move data into the cloud environment, you're not going to do it in a big bang project. It's going to take time. It's going to be a phased approach. So you're going to see yourself in this picture where you're going to have some data on-prem, some data in the cloud. And as the data is moving across in your phased migration project, The consumer is oblivious to the fact. They don't need to know. Nothing is changing for the consumer. And then maybe some of the sources are going to remain on-prem. Maybe it doesn't make sense to move them. Maybe there is data ownership issues. And then it takes me to this story. So again, we're sticking to the deployment model at this point. We have a solution which is capable to connecting to any data out there in any format. It creates the semantics layer on top of it, and it can be deployed anywhere. But sticking to the data story, this is a realistic picture. It's not only about hybrid environment where you have on-prem and cloud systems. It's about multi-cloud environment. So in this picture, you can have your Denodo connecting to any data. You can have a single Denodo instance connecting to your on-prem systems, your cloud systems, anywhere in the world. And sometimes it's going to take longer if you're going to have a system in the United States connecting to some EMEA system. Sometimes it's going to be more robust and you're going to have a shorter latency. So a common architecture that we see is that let's place Denodo close to the data. And this is the best practice. The data access layer have to reside close to the data. So now, if I have users connecting to my Denodo instance running on-prem, if they want to get access to the information running locally, my local Denodo on-prem is going to query the information, is going to do all the optimizations, and it's going to get them the result. If they want to have information which has to be obtained from on-prem and from the Amazon services, Denodo is going to optimize the query. It's going to do push down, get local information from on-prem system. It's going to take only relevant query information, push it to the Denodo instance running in the cloud. That local Denodo instance is going to do local optimization, get information from the cloud sources, again, only relevant information, and then propagate it back to the local Denodo instance, which is going to combine everything and present it to the user. Critical benefit here is latency on the network. Instead of pushing millions and millions of records across your network, you're pushing only relevant information, pre-aggregated information. And then if you have other users connecting to the local instance in your European zone, again, it's the same story. You have that great, flexible, optimized approach where you can have hybrid cloud architecture and multi-cloud architecture, saving you latency, ensuring that the response time is within seconds, which is the requirement for analytics, and also reducing cost. In many cloud systems, data movement is equivalent to paying for the data movement. So if this is a topic of interest, do reach out to me and we can take a deeper dive into the cloud architecture. But at this point, let's actually talk about our consumers. So our consumers are, we're talking about analytics. This is an analytics series. So we were able to connect the data, combine the data, create that semantics layer, and now if you have the consumers or BI tools consuming the data from Denodo. We actually have prepackaged connectors in some of the big BI tools such as Tableau, MicroStrategy, Cognos, who can easily connect to the Denodo layer with the prepackaged connector. Those products who don't have a prepackaged connector or maybe other applications can have a simple JDBC connection to the Denodo. And the Denodo is going to provide that abstraction layer to all of the data sources. So the consumer is essentially getting SQL on top of any data via Denodo. For some of the web applications, you can use OData, SOAP, GraphQL, whatever is the liking of your application. And this is the self-service part. The self-service consuming application does not need to change. They can use the data format and data protocol of their liking to get the data from anywhere using the abstraction layer. Also, regarding and regardless who is connecting to us, they're going to have the single version of truth. If my BI application and MicroStrategy is asking for customer information, and my machine application, my another application, is asking for customer information using GraphQL, they're going to get exactly the same information. Customer is the customer is the customer as defined. They're getting that single version of truth, and that centralized secure model is going to be applied on the data itself. So BI user might get only secure information that they're allowed to see, while an application consuming the same data is going to have a different view of the data, maybe with additional masking capabilities. For the scientist, who is another critical consumer, we have an integrated data science notebook based on Jupyter, and the data scientist, again, can easily use their own tools, R Studio or whatever is of their liking, and they can connect to Denodo and get instant access to all of the data regardless of the format. So for the developer, they're using a web-based studio to connect and combine all of the data in any format to that single semantics layer, deployed anywhere in a hybrid environment, and then consumers are just consuming data, having that SQL on top of anything approach. But we also have a different type of the consumer. We have that self-service business user. We have a data steward who wants to see what type of data is available. They want to search for data. And for them, we have a data catalog. Data catalog enables a business user to log in to a Denodo data catalog portal and start searching and looking for data assets. Based on the history of the usage, based on the history of what user has been searching for in the past, Denodo will actually provide recommendations saying, well, you know what? You've been searching for financial information for the customers, and there is a new asset, there is a new customer artifact, there is a new view of the customer that has been created, which also has some campaign information. So we will actually provide recommendations to the user. It provides that single interface for all of the data discovery. The user can search, the data steward can search for the content of the data as well as context. It has full data lineage. So when I'm looking at the customer record, I can actually see where did the address come from? Where did the demographic information came from? And if I have other data catalog tools in my enterprise, maybe Calibra or anything else out there, I can actually integrate it. So I can have that enterprise-wide logical data fabric established where all of the tools live together happily. Data virtualization provides that unified interface to get all of the data access, that centralized security model. It has the data catalog to provide for the data discovery. And again, it has that unified approach with an agile data access, saving you cost of eliminating data movement. So now, from personal experience, I think it's always critical to actually try out different products. It's critical to actually give it a try, get behind the wheel. So Denodo offers multiple ways you can try out the Denodo platform. You can try it out for different use cases. You can try it out on your own cloud environment with your own data. Or you can try it out on our cloud environment where we can actually provision environment for you. And you can follow the tutorial and get access to multiple data sources. So there is nothing like actually trying out the product. Denodo has an extensive community. So you can find any topic out there in the Denodo community. There's a lot of discussion happening about different connectivity, different releases, and we just came out with Denodo version 8. So I highly encourage you to take a look on the website, take a look at all of the new features, which are all about agile approach, agile deployment, and usability itself with web-based tools for the developers and developers of the deployment models. Take a look at the success stories. And this is just a snapshot. Take a look at different use cases. They're all published, they're recordings, they're architecture diagrams. Take a look at different industries, be that insurance, be that banking, be that medical. Take a look at different aspects. Denodo data virtualization is flexible. It provides usability across different use cases. It's all about data. It's all about connecting different data, providing the semantics layer, and exposing data to the consumers. Some closing remarks. So when you talk about different analysts like Gartner, Forrester, you hear the term about data fabric. So what Denodo provides, it provides a logical data fabric using data virtualization. The data is not copied. You have that single version of truth. The data is in place. And when you get access to the data, you get access in real time with a single centralized governance layer, fully optimized, and you just have data access at your fingertips. So this is critical. And as you've seen, the movement of data virtualization and the requirement of data virtualization as being key component of modern data integration is going to continue on its trend. And this is something to keep an eye on. Take it for the test drive, get familiar with Denodo, let us know if there are any questions, follow up, and we can give you more information. And with that closing note, we can turn to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was a great deep dive into the virtualization platform. And I want to give the audience a little bit to kind of digest that and throw your questions into the Q&A, and we can get to those. I have a couple of questions for you myself, though. As you were talking, a couple of use cases really popped into my mind. So the first one is around data science. And I think about like this process of exploring data, seeing what's out there, understanding the context, building models on top of the data. And there's this really significant like chasm between training and building models and then like deploying them and using data sets in order to run them in production. And I always see this huge struggle of data scientists who literally will find the data set, manipulate it. They'll typically like download a CSV into their local environment. They'll build their model. And then when it's ready to deploy, they're like, okay, so now we have to attach this thing to a production data set that matches the exact schema of the data we used when we were building it. So do you see typical like struggles like that where the virtualization layer can significantly help with that process of migrating models from development to production?
Absolutely. And I think the key there is that when we talk about the data scientist, it's said that data scientists spend about 80% of the time doing data exploration and only about 20% of the time actually generating insight. And I think this is critical. If you're going to provide a single entry point for the data scientist, where they can easily just, with a single click, connect to their Jupyter notebook and see all of the data, all of the models available to them, they don't have to go hunting. And if there is a new data set, they don't have to go asking for a data set, getting the permissions. Everything is integrated for the data scientists. And we see this one of the more dominant use cases currently. And that's one of the reasons why in version 8, which came out, we have an integrated data scientist notebook based on Apache Jupyter, Apache Zeppelin, which is part of the product itself. But also Jupyter is popular, and we have many clients using Jupyter Notebook to connect to the Denodo and having that SQL on top of anything approach to get all of the data access.
Yeah, I mean, like you talk about data movement and it's crazy because you usually don't think about how much data we're really moving around. I mean, we're moving from this like typical trend of saying, okay, I found data in this SQL database and I'm going to download that CSV file onto my local machine. I found the other data source in this database. I'm going to download that. Then I'm going to try to join all of this stuff on my local computer, and you run into tons of issues, right? So just having, like you mentioned, this virtualization layer where you're like, okay, I'm not going to move the data. I'm just going to logically figure out where the data is. How do I combine it together? And how do I create a view that I'm going to eventually execute against, but I don't have to do that initially.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, just from the data scientist perspective, I see a ton of value in this. I also
And also something you mentioned is very critical. You mentioned you downloading the data locally into your machine. So you're creating a data replication process here. So the data that you're working on today might not be the same as someone else is working on with the same data set tomorrow. So when you're presenting that information to your management team, you might be actually presenting different results, different insights. And this is where the data virtualization is critical. It's providing that single version of truth. Data is always real, data is timely, and you just have access to the same data all the time.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is this idea of like this single source of truth where you're saying, okay, we're all agreeing that this particular view across these different data sources combined together means this sort of thing, and we're going to deploy this view to make it available to people. I just think that's so incredibly important and so different from the way that companies are currently architecting the way that they do that. We did get a question from the audience. So does the optimization process, is that determined on the fly, depending on the amount and location of the data?
Absolutely. So what Denodo offers, it has an optimizer. Depending on when the query is executed from the consumer and it hits the Denodo layer, it sees what type of optimization can be performed, be the statics or dynamic optimization. And sometimes it will actually rewrite the query, especially when you have complicated joins and unions across multiple views. It will also look at the data itself. And this is what I mentioned. If there is a lot of data in your, I don't know, Redshift, you have millions and millions of records, and you have a local SQL table which has only 400 customer records, and you're trying to join and do manipulation across the data together, Denodo will actually figure out that it might be cheaper and faster to take those 400 records, move it into that larger data set, do query pushdown, do all of the aggregation and manipulation on the data source, and then just propagate relevant subset of information back to the consumer. So all of the queries are optimized on the fly. All of them go through the optimization process, regardless if they're coming from an analytical application, such as BI tool, data scientist, data catalog, which is for the data stewards doing data discovery, or other applications. And I think this is critical because when you have existing ESB processes deployed and you're doing the data movement and you have the transactional layer, you can actually enrich that ESB process and you can enable the ESB to have a RESTful call to the Denodo platform and get all the data. So it's all done on the fly and fully optimized.
There's a follow-up question to that as well, which is when you say the data is moved, where is more optimal? Where does it happen? In the cache? Like where is the data movement happening?
There are actually multiple aspects of the optimization. We do have options for the cache. There is a full incremental cache depending on the configuration. There is also scheduled refresh for the caching itself. So yes, you can Denodo will utilize the cache when applicable. But also it has data movement where it will literally move the data across to a different data set, to the different data location, and it will perform aggregations there. Also, it utilizes summary tables, which is aggregation awareness. So there are multiple layers of optimizations which can be performed, all on the fly, and it really depends on the use case. It really depends on your data source, and it depends on the data ownership.
Thank you for that. There's another question that we have from the audience as well. It says, what kind of performance challenges have you seen based on different sources, specifically on-prem, and data volumes and use of various technologies?
So there are a couple of the best practices which we are following to make sure we elevate the performance challenges. There's always performance challenges with any product. It's all about data movement. So a couple of the best practices is trying to keep Denodo close to the data. So if you think back about that multi-cloud architecture, where I had Denodo instances on-prem and in the cloud, that would enables me to keep Denodo accessing data close to the data itself, eliminating that network latency. Also, depending on the data source and really depending on the deployment model, there are multiple optimizations. For instance, if there is a Presto in the picture, you have a Presto cloud, a cluster which is enabling MPP. So we can utilize that. There is also different data movement. There is different statistical analytics we're doing to gather the information of past query execution to optimize. So it really depends on the data itself, and we're constantly doing different benchmarks about different data sets. Also, when we talk about data which is not persisted, such as accessing an API, accessing a web service as your data asset, especially in social media. I'm talking about my customer and trying to get customer information, and I would like to reach out and see their Facebook post. Some of that information is going to take a long time to access on the fly. It's latency, it's network. So we can actually persist that information locally, or we can cache it. So there are multiple approaches to optimize the performance depending on the data source. We have different best practices published, but again, it's very unique to the deployment with hundreds and hundreds of different formats and data sources. It would depend on the specific use case.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Something that popped into my head as you were talking about that too was the fact that a lot of companies are expecting data scientists to also be data engineers. And then they're kind of expecting them to be the ones writing these queries. And oftentimes they don't understand the performance, impact that has. And so, Denodo is a really nice way to abstract that away, especially if you are heavily relying on your data scientists to build what it looks like when you're pulling data and kind of take away the hard part of query optimization, really.
And this is actually one of the points is I'm good with SQL. I know how to write SQL at some level. I would give myself maybe a 5 or a 6 rating. But when my SQL is passed to the Denodo layer, they're going to optimize it into a 10. And also it's about the skill set. When my daughter is going to be in college, yes, most likely she's going to learn what SQL is. It's still dominant. It's going to be dominant in 10 years. But that's about it, and it's going to be something new on top of that. So I cannot expect the new generation to know what COBOL books are, what IMS is, what DB2 is. They're going to be oblivious to the fact. So it's all about having that centralized, easy to use interface across all of your data assets.
Yeah, and also there's a reusability component of this too. I mean, you're starting to collaborate with other data scientists, and they should really be solely focused on the statistical approach that they're going to take, and not really worrying about any of the finding of the data, extracting it, making sure other people on their team have access to it. I mean, that's really a lot of the problems. One other really interesting use case, you mentioned these hybrid strategies for where data sits. And there's a huge initiative for a lot of companies to migrate to the cloud, especially for their data processing. So I think what's really interesting is data virtualization allows you to have this hybrid solution. So if you have data on-prem and you have it in the cloud, then that's totally fine. But it also helps them move to the cloud. So it doesn't create this bigger barrier of having to change access points as you start to migrate to the cloud and also be concerned about performance. So have you seen a significant discussion point around that?
Absolutely. Denodo is being used as the migration facilitator in that phased approach, where currently I'm connecting to my local data assets. And as I move them to the cloud environment, My consumers are still connecting to me. They're connecting to Denodo. It's my pain point to figure out where the data is coming from. It's not about pain point for the consumer. And also when all the data, if the company chooses to move all the data into the cloud, which realistically is not always the case, it's pretty much always hybrid, Denodo can move into the cloud as well, or it can stay on-prem, or it can stay in both places. But again, it's all about having that, and I'll go back to the nationwide presentation from Tuesday where they had that Instacart collecting all of the data from multiple locations. It's like, I don't want to go to multiple stores. I want to go to a single place and get all the information, all the data, and I want to get it quickly.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up too the like cataloging features that were just released as well, because there's this component there's like a communication layer that happens too of knowing where the data is, searchability of that data, access of that data. So I think that that's going to be totally critical, and it's obviously something people are really struggling with. I'm starting to see too, there's more of a trend of companies who are actually like, there was such a big issue with wanting everything to be in a relational database because you had such a problem of trying to combine different data sources. But companies are starting to realize that the structure of the data is most conducive in non-relational databases, like a graph database, for example. And so I am starting to see some companies, give into that because they do have something that is like a virtualization layer on top of it that allows them to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting you mentioned the graph aspect because when you talk about the consumers who are applications, many of them are relying on technology such as GraphQL, which enables you to see data assets as nodes and have the relationship between them. So in Denodo, when we utilize GraphQL, different views, different components of the views are those data nodes, and the associations between the data are the relationships. So I can actually use a single query to get information from multiple data nodes simply by establishing a relationship.
Yeah, I literally love the graphical like interface of showing relationships with nodes and whatnot. And you do have that in your platform. I have seen it. It's awesome. I know we have a few minutes left, so I want to thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. I think this is just such a timely topic for a lot of companies that are making this move to better searchability and accessibility of their data. So thank you again for joining us
and
today.
Thank you for having me. This has been awesome. And
oh, good.
If there are any questions, you know how to reach us.
Yeah, that sounds great. So real quick for everybody that's on the webinar still, we have a couple more events coming up in the next month or so. So if you go to womenandanalytics.com, you can look at the Get Involved piece. There's upcoming webinars. We do webinars like this all the time. So feel free to follow us on our social media accounts to stay in the know. And we will be sending you a follow-up email with the link to this recording if you just like loved this so much, want to watch it again or share it with your colleagues. So thank you for joining us, especially during your lunch hour if you're on the East Coast. And we will hopefully see you at our next event.
Thank you all.
Thank you.